We've got a special bonus episode tonight. Normally, Sundays end with Charles Ortel. But Larry, you're here to give us the Colonel's secret recipe with regard to constitutional law. How are you, Larry? You're looking well.
Or Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Exactly.
I'm the Jewish Christian version of Colonel Sanders.
Yes, and I think that's suiting you well. Larry, you told us long ago on this show that Judge Emmet Sullivan, who you know, who I have had the pleasure to observe you in his courtroom interacting with him, and it is highly educational to see. You made the call that Emmet Sullivan would be very upset that Sidney Powell was making this sort of very public deal out of the exculpatory evidence and everything she was doing on Fox News. What do you make of these latest things that are happening in Emmet Sullivan's courtroom with regard to Michael Flynn?
First of all, let me say that Sidney Powell did an excellent job as a lawyer uncovering a lot of the deceit and corruption and withholding of exculpatory evidence that affected General Mike Flynn. So I give her credit for that. But the mistake was going on Hannity, going on Fox News, grandstanding it, and allowing these characters over there, mostly Hannity, to just basically rip the judge to shreds. Now, I know the judge for a long time. I've appeared in front of him in many instances. Of all the Clinton appointees and Democrats on that court, he has the most integrity. I might add the other ones have none, but he has integrity. And you can't poke the guy. I mean, you can't hold him up to that kind of ridicule and not expect him to push back. Now, let us go back and remember, and again, I'm sympathetic to General Flynn, and I believe that the motion ultimately will be granted to dismiss the case. But let's get real here. In the beginning, General Flynn hired the law firm of Covington and Burling. That was not a good idea. I expressed myself publicly on that and to other people in confidence, important people. I said, you can't hire that law firm. Number one, it's a very partisan Democrat law firm. It's the law firm of Eric Holder, former Attorney General under Obama, former Deputy Attorney General under Clinton, the law firm of Lanny Brewer, the head of the criminal division under Obama. And they've got a bunch of Democrat political hacks over there. And you don't want to hire a Washington, D.C. law firm that is a mega law firm that's part of the whole swamp.
Yeah.
But General Flynn went ahead and he did that. And in particular, he hired a so-called Republican lawyer. An establishment rhino Republican lawyer is not hiring any Republican conservative lawyer at all. But his name is Joseph Kellner. Now, his specialty is federal election commission law. Yeah, Robert Kellner. No, it's Joseph Kellner, I think. Whatever, Kellner. Check it out.
Yeah.
That's Allstate Insurance. Joseph Kellner.
No, I know. I'm looking for, well, the thing that I was looking at earlier was a Politico article that was telling us that they had actually called this guy, his ex-lawyer was taking the witness stand for the prosecution, and this was Kellner, Robert Kellner. Flynn's prosecutors called ex-Flynn attorney Robert Kellner as a witness.
Okay.
How can they do that, Larry? Doesn't attorney-client privilege prevent the guy
I don't know
from
where
testifying?
I got Joseph. It's Robert. Anyway, let's me finish this and then we'll talk about
Sure.
that. But Kellner is a lawyer of whose specialty is Federal Election Commission law and the Foreign Agents Registration Act. He's not a criminal defense lawyer. And I recommended through channels that someone like my former colleague and classmate at Emory University School of Law, Craig Gillen. He was one of the top 3 criminal defense lawyers in the United States, be hired, and somebody outside of Washington who isn't subject to the politics directly of Washington. By the way, Craig was number 2 in the investigation, the Irangate independent counsel investigation of Lawrence Walsh. He knows what he's doing. He knows his way around Washington, but he's not beholden. Or somebody like that, maybe somebody from Charlie Black's office in Miami. Whoever, but certainly not a lawyer at Covington and Burling. Now, what happened is, and basically to get to the point, is that I believe Covington and Burling threw the general under the bus and pushed him into taking a plea for one count of perjury in exchange for a recommendation that he not get any jail time. That's the opposite of what my client Jerry Corsi did, who stood his ground on my advice, and he didn't plead guilty to something he didn't commit. He held his ground and he won. We wound up suing Mueller. We wound up filing criminal complaints at the Justice Department against Mueller and his staff. We pushed back enough that Jerry was left alone, and he was not indicted while Roger Stone was indicted and then convicted on 7 counts, 5 counts of perjury, witness tampering, and obstruction of justice. Jerry did not lie under oath like Roger Stone did. Jerry did not threaten witnesses like Roger Stone. And Jerry handled himself appropriately, and that's why he was not indicted. But he didn't ever consider pleading to something he didn't do. So this was a huge mistake by General Flynn. I mean, you can understand why he did it, but he got up in front of Judge Emmet Sullivan, and when he took the plea, when Sullivan took the plea from General Flynn, and he was asked, "Did you commit this crime?" And Flynn said, "Yes." "And are you pleading guilty?" And Flynn said, "Yes." So in many ways, General Flynn has himself to blame, as well as Covington and Burling, for the predicament that he's now in. Now,
sorry, Larry, let me ask you this, because people in the comments are curious. This thing that Sullivan is bringing against Flynn now is perjury related to those statements in the courtroom, right? This is like a new charge he's bringing up.
He's doing both. I mean, he's visiting the plea of guilty to see whether or not he wants to enforce that on his own, which he has the ability to do. There was a plea of guilty, and that was said under oath. Yes, so you're right, is that Sullivan is also looking into whether there was contempt of court by making that statement, which now Flynn says isn't true. So let's back up a little bit here. I'm not a real fan of federal judges. They are very politicized. The great majority of them, frankly, are political hacks. I mean, I'll tell you that in these kinds of cases, but Sullivan is not. And I give him some credit. However, he is very reactive. He's very prickly. He can push back. He's pushed back against me from time to time. And, by having Hannity and others showcase this, including Rush Limbaugh, I like Rush. I don't like Hannity. You know that, and everybody knows that. But by having them lead interference, and I might add Mark Levin as well, and others, they are challenging Judge Sullivan to in effect, torture General Flynn.
Yeah.
Because he feels like he's been toyed with. He feels like he's been lied to. And if you were a federal judge, you wouldn't want to be lied to either. And a lot of people on Crowdsource the Truth went after me a few weeks ago when I said that Roger Stone deserved to be convicted, when I said Roger Stone does not deserve a pardon. It is a serious criminal offense to lie under oath, to threaten witnesses, and to obstruct justice. Now, Flynn didn't threaten any witnesses, but that's something that needs to be taken seriously. Our legal system cannot function if people lie under oath and say things that they don't mean, trying to retract them later. So I think you have to understand why the judge is reacting. Now, I believe that the judge will go through this dog and pony show, and in the end, he will let Flynn off. But he's teaching Flynn and everybody else a lesson that you can't do this. It's not appropriate. He does not deserve to be destroyed, vilified, and attacked by Sean Hannity, who with a high school education, no offense, there are a lot of smart people that went to high school, believe me.
Hannity's not one.
If Hannity's IQ is over 80, I would be very surprised. I mean, just by look at his monologues every night. The same monologue repackaged, changing a few words.
Yeah.
I can't stand it anymore. I actually detest watching it. I turn it off because he sells stuff simply to boost his ratings and advertising dollars, and it's disgusting. So, frankly, if I was sitting in Flynn's in Emmet Sullivan's shoes, I might initially be reactive too, but that's not the basis of it. He will eventually let Flynn off, but Hannity should shut up, and so should the rest, and let this thing play itself out.
It feels a bit vindictive, though, Larry, for a federal judge to be acting in this way. I mean, I spoke with Alan Dershowitz yesterday, and I don't think he and I saw eye to eye on too many things, but we did agree that this is not really appropriate behavior for a federal judge to bring in this other judge to argue against the prosecutors who are trying to drop the charges. I mean, this is amazing for me to be agreeing with something in the Wall Street Journal, and I mean something having to do with Justice Ginsburg, but apparently, I don't know, it's hard to believe that she's still healthy enough to write anything, but she apparently wrote this whole thing saying that this is an abuse by Emmet Sullivan. I think this even talks about Leon being caught up in something similar to this in the past and getting overruled. Have you had a chance to see this, and what do you think about the Supreme Court
Ginsburg
weighing
actually
in?
write that herself?
This is Judge Sullivan versus Justice Ginsburg in his zeal to convict Michael Flynn of something. This is from the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal, but they're saying that
Well, that's not Ginsburg.
he's harming his
herself.
own reputation and violating the law, as he'd know if he'd read Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's opinion last week overturning the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. So this is from last week. And I think this had something to do with Leon. I was trying to catch up with this stuff. But it just seems to me, Larry, these federal judges, they feel emboldened, like, they have these lifetime appointments and they can do whatever they want and challenge presidents and stuff like that. It seems like the checks and balances have kind of gotten out of balance. And as you said, law firms like Covington and Burling that gain a lot of power, they obviously have a ton of money. Eric Holder having been the Attorney General. These guys have hooks into the Department of Justice and even probably still people who want things from them. I mean, if you're a DOJ attorney and you're dealing with Eric Holder, you might have your eyes on a very lucrative position at Covington and Burling, so long as you take care of this little thing for me, right? I mean, isn't that happening?
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's back up a little bit here again, is that it doesn't make it right, but courts frequently will appoint independent so-called prosecutors or counsel to argue an issue when the government is taking a contrary position that they may disagree with. It happened, for instance, with regard to Proposition 8 in California in state court, when one of the worst governors in California history, Arnold Schwarzenegger, probably spent more time with his au pair than he did actually governing the state, refused to enforce Proposition 8. Okay, so the courts actually appointed somebody to argue on behalf of the state against Proposition 8, okay, which went by the wayside. It also happened with regard to my client and friend, Sheriff Arpaio, when he went to the Ninth Circuit seeking to have his conviction for a mere misdemeanor set aside because he got a pardon from President Trump, is that the Ninth Circuit, who's no friend of Arpaio, appointed an independent counsel to argue the case against Sheriff Arpaio because the Trump Justice Department would not step in. So it does happen, okay? It doesn't make it right, but it does happen. So what Sullivan wants is some cover here. And he wants a lawyer to come forward who is an ex-judge. Obviously, Sullivan knows what the judge is going to say or he wouldn't have appointed him.
Right.
And he's going to argue that he has independent authority to enforce the plea. And that is a problem. But I do believe that in the end, I may be wrong, I believe that Flynn will probably be let off by Sullivan. He may be sanctioned in some way. His lawyers may be sanctioned in some way. And I'll tell you something. If Flynn has a real gripe, it's with Covington and Burling. He's got a massive legal malpractice case.
Yeah.
And frankly, I've offered to take it because
Covington
and Burling is a slimy, disgusting, vile law firm. It really is. And so are most of these mega firms in Washington, D.C. I mean, they just sliver around, stuffing money in the pockets of politicians, getting their way. It's part of the Washington swamp. And, it's just a really bad situation. And for Flynn to have hired them was frankly stupid.
Well, I spoke to his brother about that, and I think that people have various areas of expertise, and certainly navigating the legal minefield of Washington, D.C. might not be General Flynn's, or at least he knows a lot more about it now than he did when he started. It remains a mystery how that happened. I'm pretty fascinated by this, Larry. I think that when you see a sleight of hand trick and the magician says pick any card and you pick the 2 of diamonds and the guy knows. How did he know? There's a sleight of hand technique called forcing a card, and I wonder if there's not some psychological equivalent for doing that. How did they get Flynn to pick that law firm? We don't really know. But let's talk for a second about this John Gleason.
Let me just discuss that. That's part of, so-called conventional wisdom in Washington. You have to hire a big law firm that has political influence. And when I said stuffing money into pockets, I'm not saying the Covington and Burling lawyers actually stuff actual money. But, people raise money, they do favors, you scratch my
jobs
back
down the road.
I'll scratch your back. And look, another law firm, Wilmer Hale, from which Special Counsel Robert Mueller hails, pun intended. Okay, and Jeannie Rhee, one of his prosecutors, who I went up against when I filed a RICO case against the Clinton Foundation years ago in the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of Florida. They've donated all kinds of money to get 2 of their judges on the court at the lower level in D.C. And that's what they do. I mean, Washington is so corrupt to the core that these things are wired. And, so that's why it was a big mistake. And I actually, suggested publicly that not happen at the time. We were talking about it on your show and other shows. It was a huge mistake. So this is a mess. But in the end, Sullivan's going to extract his pound of flesh, and he will let Flynn go.
So let's talk about this Politico article, because it seems like this prosecution of Michael Flynn is very much tied to, and there's pressure being put on it by this other case that involves his son and this consulting firm that he had. How is it that his ex-attorney is able to take the witness stand for the prosecution without violating attorney-client privilege?
Well, there's a thing called the crime fraud exception. So I don't know this story. I don't know the background of it. But if a lawyer participates in a crime for a client, the client loses his or her attorney-client privilege. And that's how something like that can happen.
Wow, that's interesting. So we got to look into this more for sure. But I remember when I was in, I guess it was the sentencing hearing, or, that one where Judge Sullivan misspoke and accused General Flynn of treason. They were talking a lot about this case and how his son could get into a problem. And that's a real lever.
Jason, I'm not one who usually, supports federal judges. I have so many appeals going on now with political hack federal judges that decided they were going to decide whether the case was plausible or not give it to a jury. It's something that is endemic to me. I mean, it sticks in my craw just how intellectually corrupt the federal judiciary is and has become. It was Thomas Jefferson who warned of the power of federal judges to become despots. Go back and look at some of his writings. He was very prescient here. He said they're unelected, they're not accountable to the people, and they will become despots. And someday we will have to shed the blood of patriots in yet another revolution. That's what he said. Now, I don't want to see blood of patriots being shed at all. But in this instance, you've got someone here who made a comment about, and he shouldn't have made that comment. It was inappropriate. But what did Flynn do? He's saying this is overlooked, is that, as I recollect, he took $500,000 from the government of Turkey that was being run by this radical Islamist Erdogan. And he was doing it in and around the time that he was helping President Trump win the presidency. I mean, that was not smart, to be honest. And why would you, as a general, a patriot, want to work for a radical Islamic regime that hates the United States? See, this is a problem in Washington, is that a lot of these officials and military people, they don't make much money, in terms of what they do and, in their career. And when they get out, they want to make money. And sometimes they do things that aren't real smart. And that wasn't real smart either. So that's what Sullivan's
But
remark was talking
to be
about.
to be fair, though, Larry, making a move that perhaps is not strategic or, as you describe it, not smart, you can't just immediately jump to treason, particularly not in the forum of a federal court with a
I agree with you.
judge.
It was inappropriate. It was an inappropriate remark. It was something that a federal judge should not have made, and Judge Sullivan should be condemned for making that statement. But I'm also saying on the other side of the coin, here's where I think it came from. You know, a general of the United States who has all this information about U.S. national security should not be working for a quasi-terrorist regime in Turkey.
But they are a NATO ally, right? I mean, I agree with you. They are a quasi-terrorist or even just a straight-out terrorist regime. But, I mean, there's so many details here. We're getting a little bit off on a tangent. I mean, I think what we want to focus on is this concept that he's brought in this Judge Gleason. Let's talk about Judge Gleason for a moment, if we could. Do you know about this guy?
Yeah,
Wasn't he one of the 93 U.S. attorneys hired by Bill Clinton after he fired all of them when he came in there?
I'm sure the guy is politicized. I'm sure he is. But let me also back up again here. Okay, this is why I say what I say. And I know sometimes people don't like to hear what I have to say, but I'll always say what I think is true. And I just cannot stand listening to the Kool-Aid, one side on MSNBC and one side on CNN and another side on Fox. There are always other issues that need to be discussed. It's not black or white.
Right.
And Flynn messed up. He did mess up. He doesn't deserve to go to prison, and he does deserve to have his indictment dismissed because there was a lot of prosecutorial misconduct. But also ask yourself this question, Jason. I'm sorry if I'm taking over your show.
No, it's your segment.
Here you have this blowhard, overstuffed blowhard, Bill Barr, okay, Attorney General, who doesn't indict anybody, such as Comey or McCabe or Strzok or Page or the Clintons or the Obamas. He's given them all a free pass. Don't expect that John Durham's going to do it either. Forget that concept.
Really?
But here you got him sticking his neck out for Flynn. But what does he do with regard to my clients, the Bundys? Which what happened to them was even worse, where federal goons came onto their property and assaulted them physically, killed their cattle, buried it in a mass grave, tased their sons. And then Obama comes along with a political prosecution and indicts them when Loretta Lynch is Attorney General. And then we find out at trial that documents were hidden, that there was a kill list on the heads of the Bundys. The prosecutors had lied under oath, that government FBI agents had lied under oath. So, I wrote to Barr and I communicated with him in other ways. And I said, please, your Justice Department under Trump took an appeal of this injustice, dismissed the appeal, withdraw the appeal. What does this fat blowhard do? Nothing. I have no respect for Barr. I have no respect for the Trump Justice Department. It's a sham. And so, yes, Flynn gets special treatment because he's a Washington insider and because people are screaming that he needs, justice. But what about the Bundys and everybody else in this country who's thrown under the bus and ignored because they're not of the stature of General Flynn? And that's what also bothers me in this whole thing. So I'm going to say what I have to say, whether your listeners like it or not. I'm going to say it because I'm sorry, I'm not here to accept the bullshit that comes out of Sean Hannity's mouth every night.
Well, let me ask you something about a point that you've just raised, because I think it's not clear that Barr has done really anything to help Flynn. Mike Moore of True Pundit made a very good point that this might have been something that William Barr was doing to help William Barr, to make him appear to be on the side of President Trump's supporters and General Flynn's supporters. But perhaps William Barr knew full well what Emmet Sullivan was planning. And as they say, it ain't over till the fat lady sings. And I don't hear any singing just yet. There still seems to be quite a bit of trouble ahead for General Flynn if this John Gleason...
He's been bankrupted. This is going to cost a lot of money to go through it. My heart goes out for him. I think he's a good man. And he made some mistakes, and it's costing him right now. But
what do you say about the concept that perhaps William Barr did this not actually out of any desire to help Flynn, but just to make himself look good, knowing that it wouldn't actually, this is kind of a lot of nothing that Barr has done so far.
Well, you're right. He is making himself look good. There's no question about it. But on the other hand, what he did seems to be backfiring for the moment. And he's getting a lot of help from the so-called conservative media to make it backfire.
Right. Well, all right. So let's move on to another topic, Larry. Let's talk a bit about some of the things that came up in my conversation yesterday with Alan Dershowitz. We were talking about, my primary questions to him had to do with the constitutionality of what was happening with the Flynn case, and also of some of these decrees that the governors in New York and California and states around the country have been making. I was shocked by some of the stuff that Alan Dershowitz said, and he pointed to a precedent that you and other lawyers I've spoken to agree is in place. But it seems to me there's so many problems with this mandatory vaccination because it relies on certain medical conclusions being conclusive. And I think when it comes to law, the law itself is a construct of man, and we can have argumentation back and forth as to what we think it should be. But once it's agreed upon, it becomes this sort of settled thing that we refer back to. But science isn't like that. Someone could discover anything at any time about the human body, about our understanding of the universe, that could overturn previously understood scientific principles in a way that there's not something that's going to be discovered about the Constitution that nobody knows right now. How can we rely on the conclusions of flawed scientists like Anthony Fauci to allow the government to inject us with chemicals and vaccines? I mean, this seems like a real big problem to me, Larry.
Well, there is information out there that Fauci may have, profited from a lot of these vaccines, that he owns patents, and obviously, he wants to push it in that direction. But let's talk about the legal aspect of things. And that is this Supreme Court decision, which Dershowitz probably made reference to. I didn't see your show. I'm sure it was excellent. Is a 100-year-old decision. Okay. And it hasn't been revisited by the Supreme Court. Now, it probably will wind up being revisited in the next few years in the context of this COVID-19 pandemic. Now, I believe that, in my own view, is that the government cannot force you to take a vaccine. That not only is a violation of the 14th Amendment, you don't have due process in terms of explaining, what your health risks may be or anything else, but also it's a violation of the Fourth Amendment. It's like an unreasonable search and seizure, body search, that kind of thing. So there are a lot of reasons why this can wind up being overturned, but it is currently on the books, and a lot of state courts, in fact, all state courts have followed it because, frankly, people in power love to exercise that power. And let's also remember who Dershowitz is. Dershowitz is a leftist. He's generally an ultra-leftist. Now, he's said some good things in the last several years, I think mostly because he was frozen off of CNN and MSNBC. He's trying to ingratiate himself with the conservative community. But some of what he said has been sincere. But he is someone who believes in government power and government control, even if he is a criminal defense lawyer. In that context, he doesn't. But in other areas, he does. And the left believes that the government gets to control your life. And that's what this is about in essence.
Right. Well, and as you point out, he said some things even in our conversation yesterday that seemed contradictory just within the context of what he was saying. So people should go back and watch that again if they haven't seen it. There were more questions I wanted to ask him. Were you surprised? Oh, you didn't get to see it. Well, I asked him several questions about Jeffrey Epstein. What is the story, Larry? Does attorney-client privilege survive the death of a client? Why wouldn't Dershowitz just tell me, I don't want to talk about that?
Well, it does survive the death of a client. But on the other hand, your privacy rights are gone if it's not attorney-client privilege once you die. And, that was an argument that was made when we wanted to see the photographs of the dead Osama bin Laden, okay, in a FOIA case. Both Judicial Watch and I were trying to get those photographs, and a hack federal judge by the name of James Boasberg on the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia wouldn't allow that to happen. An appointee of Obama. Obama didn't want it out because he thought it would offend his Muslim community.
Yeah,
And
I don't believe that.
took place. But yeah,
it wasn't Osama bin Laden is why they didn't want it out, I think.
Well, I frankly don't think that Obama killed Osama bin Laden. I think he died of natural causes a lot earlier. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was
but don't you find it strange, Larry, whether attorney-client privilege covers it or not, there was really no need for Alan Dershowitz to speak to me at all about Jeffrey Epstein, because if he had just said, he's my former client and I don't want to talk about it, what would I have said? I'm not a court. I have no power to force the guy to do anything. It almost seems like he said it because he wanted to put out a story for people to believe. I mean, he could have easily just said nothing.
What story did he put out?
That Epstein never recorded videos of people, that Epstein wasn't involved in blackmail, and he said specifically, Dershowitz said specifically, that Alexander Acosta had lied when he said that he was instructed to give Epstein an easy deal because he was part of intelligence.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Has Dershowitz been implicated with Epstein? I believe he has. Correct?
Yes. Yep.
So you can't believe anything the guy says. I mean, he's on the chopping block there. So obviously he's going to take that position. So
what do you think about him directly challenging Alexander Acosta? He said the statement made by Acosta was false.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. It's speculation at this point, but certainly we know one thing. Jeffrey Epstein's dead, and it was very convenient for a lot of people for him to be dead.
Right. I don't even know if we know that.
Mostly the Bonnie and Clyde of American politics, Bill and Hillary Clinton. They're the number one suspects to this day.
Right. Well, our Mr. Dershowitz got particularly nervous when I started asking questions about reporting related to Jeffrey Epstein that has appeared in the New York Post. He even went as far as calling it a conspiracy theory, which it's not. I spoke to Ghislaine Maxwell's lawyer, whose personal information was in the EXIF data of a photograph that appeared in the New York Post. The New York Post published all kinds of things that were inaccurate, and when I called them to tell them that, they didn't publish a retraction, despite the fact that they had 3 separate stories about an In-N-Out burger that was found on the street in Queens. They followed up on that a lot. Dershowitz got very upset when I asked him these sort of questions, but I recognize we're getting into an area that you're not familiar with. Are there any updates?
In-N-Out burger. I don't think it's very good, frankly.
No, I think it's terrible. It's disgusting and
right out. It's terrible. I don't know. That's a good example of the hype in society where people, swallow the Kool-Aid. Anybody who thinks In-N-Out burger tastes good, it's about as credible as believing anything you hear on Hannity.
Yeah, and people who live outside the Los Angeles area might be confused by what we're saying, but when I was there, the hype surrounding In-N-Out burger was so amazing that I did try it one time, and it's like, I mean, if you like McDonald's and crap like that, you might like it, but it's no
like
big
cardboard.
It's terrible.
Like
Let's
cardboard.
Just get back for a minute, Larry. Last time we spoke, you were telling us about this class action lawsuit that you brought against the Chinese Communist Party. There have been a lot of developments with that. What can you tell us about that lawsuit?
Well, we have over 2,000 putative plaintiffs right now in that case, and we're seeking to serve the complaint. We had it translated into Chinese, and the Chinese over there so far are refusing to accept a Federal Express package sent by the clerk of the court in Dallas, Texas. And
wow,
if they don't play the game here, then we're going to ask the court for an alternative method of service of process, which the court can do under Rule 4. But it shows you the deceit and corruption of these communist Chinese. Now, I do take some satisfaction that just a few days ago in the communist Chinese media, I don't equate this to the Chinese people. As I've said, they're good people. 30% of the people who have signed up for our case are Chinese Americans or Asian Americans. I'm talking about the communist Chinese leadership in Beijing, who are killers, they're dictators, they're terrible. Is that they attacked me at Freedom Watch and they attacked some politicians publicly. So I actually take some satisfaction from that. If they're paying attention to what we're doing, then obviously we're doing something right. And here's the irony, It's quite clear to anybody who listens to me that I detest Fox News. I've had issues with them for many years. You can read my book, Whores, Why and How I fought the establishment. But isn't it interesting? The Chinese will take heed at the lawsuit that I filed, but they'll never make any mention of it on Fox News. Certainly not all the news that's fit to print from Fox News, and they're very critical of the New York Times in that regard.
Larry, sorry to interrupt, but it's actually very important to mention that Fox News and the New York Post are both owned by Rupert Murdoch's News Corp. So a lot of the issues that you and I are talking about and the issues that we have with some of these news outlets are essentially the same.
Yes, well, also Rupert Murdoch was married to a Chinese lady. I forget her name right now.
Wendy Murdoch.
The Politburo. And Sky News over there, in Hong Kong, is dependent upon the Communist Chinese to be able to continue broadcasting. I'm not sure if the Murdoch still owns Sky News, whether that was divested when Disney bought them out.
No,
but he probably
kept the
does.
news part. Yeah.
Yeah, well, look, another reason why you could never say that Obama was half Muslim on Fox News is because 17% of News Corp was owned by the Saudis at one time. And I think,
lead.
Yeah, and I think that it still owns a large portion of Fox Corporation. And then you also have Lachlan Murdoch as the head of Fox News now, Fox Corporation right now, and he's an ultra liberal. So there you go, and that explains the move left on Fox News. So there's a lot of swirling aspects of Fox News. See, I'm thankful that Fox News existed at one time, although I had my issues with Roger Ailes and one of my clients, Laurie Loon, was severely destroyed by him to the point that she's still suicidal today. She was in that TV series people probably saw Loudest Voice, where Ailes was sexually abusing her like an animal. But Fox News today, frankly, in my view, is a fraud. And, they just want to make money. They've profited off this COVID-19. They have death charts of people dying minute by minute to scare people, to get them to watch. It's really a despicable organization. And frankly, in my view, it's a little better than MSNBC or CNN.
How did they avoid criminal prosecution in that whole phone hacking scandal? I mean, it seems to me like this is more of an intelligence operation than an actual news channel or anything like that. How come nobody went to jail for hacking those phones? Is wire fraud?
Money talks and nobody walks. I mean, James Murdoch and company got caught with their hand in the cookie jar. The British Parliament conducted hearings and investigations, but nothing happened. But when you're that wealthy, nothing happened. Look at George Soros. Does anything ever happen to him, a Nazi collaborator who took the property of Jews on their way to gas chambers and ovens? Was he even prosecuted by the Israelis for that, for war crimes? No. Money talks and nobody walks. And that's the way it is in this world. And it's unfortunate. That's why I do what I do, because, if there's nobody like Larry Klayman or others like me, there's not even a small chance at justice for these people. Yeah. But when I sue them in court, these hack federal judges frequently throw out the cases because they know the power and influence of these individuals can affect their future career and their livelihood. And these people have the power to destroy you in one manner, shape, or form.
And we are seeing that right now with Emmet Sullivan and what he's doing with Michael Flynn. This is why I always tell people who are watching Crowdsource the Truth, I encourage them to visit freedomwatchusa.org. And it is important for people to financially contribute to what Larry and his team are doing. We can't keep this type of stuff. It's just, someone's got to stop it. We can't have these federal judges and different people in the judiciary abusing American citizens like Michael Flynn, like the Bundy family. So I hope that people will visit freedomwatchusa.org.
Jason, we're at a stage in our existence, over all these decades, in my lifetime, starting with Lyndon Johnson, lying about the Gulf of Tonkin, getting us into the Vietnam War, killing 55,000 people, maiming and harming hundreds of thousands of others, Nixon and Watergate, and by default, Nixon winds up as one of the better presidents of my lifetime, even with that. The constant line in every administration, 40 scandals during Clinton, Obama is race baiting. He's at it again right now, giving speeches to college campuses, again, trashing my client, George Zimmerman, in effect, saying you can't walk down the street without being killed by the white man. This kind of stuff, people can't believe anything anymore. And that's when it comes out of the government, no one believes it anymore. And now you've got a pandemic and you've got to have some trust, hopefully, in what you're being told. But people don't have trust about that, whether it's vaccines or anyone. People don't trust the Democrats. They don't trust Trump either. They trust nobody. And that's the scary thing. And then these state governors come along with these draconian at your home imprisonment orders, like they're somehow Mussolini.
Yeah.
And, and where are we in this country? We're at the point, and Rush Limbaugh said it last week, of a violent civil war. And I don't want to see that happen, but we are right at the edge right now. And if this thing continues with the state governors, and unless the president of the United States starts talking more clearly to the American people, then there's going to be an explosion here.
I hope that doesn't happen, Larry, but I think you might be right. You mentioned that Obama was speaking out against Mr. Zimmerman. It's interesting to note that Trayvon Martin's attorney is back in the news. Benjamin Crump is representing the family of this guy who was shot. I haven't been following this too closely, but Crump is back, and he is a real instigator of racial tension. Have you heard about this at all?
Yeah, I have, and Crump is a defendant in the lawsuit which George Zimmerman brought for defamation. He wrote a book, I'm paraphrasing, Legal Genocide Against Colored People, and he's talking about George Zimmerman primarily. And so we sued him for that. And also he's alleged in the complaint that Zimmerman brought to have put forward a fraudulent witness during the Zimmerman prosecution that could have resulted in George getting life imprisonment. So, it's not a good situation. It's not nice. And I might say with regard to Obama, he didn't actually use Zimmerman's name, but you knew he was talking about Zimmerman. It's out on the internet right now. Go find it. His
that commencement thing last night.
Yeah,
right?
He basically says, black people that walk down the street, are going to be stopped and killed by white people because they're black. So we know who he's talking about. And, this is despicable and disgusting. And, I'll stand up for anybody who fights this kind of thing. I don't care if you're white, black, green, yellow, blue. It's not right. And, this stuff goes on and on and on. I got a lawsuit against Pete Buttigieg and Elizabeth Warren in federal court in Florida. Unfortunately, it's in federal court. It was removed from the state court because of what you call diversity of citizenship. But, this political hack Buttigieg, who should know better, being a minority, being gay, and Warren, on Trayvon Martin's birthday, tried to garner black votes because they weren't doing well in the black community by calling George a white supremacist. Now, this is a guy who was working in community outreach, helping black kids. He's never said a racist word. He was acquitted of self-defense with Trayvon Martin, yet these people call him a white supremacist and a believer in gun violence, and they got to be held accountable. And, the case was assigned to an Obama-appointed judge, so I've got a little telephone hearing next week. I'm going to express my concerns. And guess who is the law firm? It's Perkins Coie, the firm that wired the Steele dossier for Hillary Clinton. The go-between. So this is going to be an interesting case in terms of politics. I mean, look out.
Yeah. And just one last note on Benjamin Crump. All the things that you were talking about are spoken about in detail in Joel Gilbert's excellent film, The Trayvon Hoax. If people haven't seen this yet, they can watch it for free in their homes. Just go to thetrayvonhoax.com. I think you can watch it for free, right? It says watch movie free now. You can buy a book. It's really worth people's time to check that out. And Joel is a brilliant filmmaker who has made a number of great documentaries. I want to talk about Laura Loomer's case also, Larry, but before we get to that, you brought it to my attention that I guess this was earlier today. The Chinese ambassador to Israel was found dead in his home. This guy looks fairly young and kind of healthy to have a heart attack. What do we know about this?
Well, we know that Secretary of State Mike Pompeo who speaks much more clearly than the president about China. Perhaps the president asks him to do that. They're playing good guy, bad guy, attack China over the coronavirus. By the way, it's not enough to attack them. Why don't you have your attorney general support Freedom Watch in our lawsuits and our criminal case at The Hague against the Chinese leadership? But anyway, he was quite vocal. The pandemic has severely affected Israel. Israel's a small country. It's really harmed severely its economy and its health. People are quarantined there as well. And, the Israelis don't mess around. I'm speculating, but I think the Israelis, knowing how many people have died in Israel, maybe the Mossad sent a warning to the Chinese Politburo in Beijing. That wouldn't surprise me.
Well, a lot of people are very aware that during the the Church Committee hearings, where the Senate was actually investigating the CIA, it was admitted that the CIA had developed a weapon that fired a pellet. It used some kind of gas-powered gun to fire an ice pellet or a needle that contained poison that was virtually undetectable but would cause a heart attack. And this has been dubbed the heart attack gun. I mean, this is the CIA's admission, not something that I made up. There's a lot of people who say I'm a conspiracy theorist for talking about this.
It's quite common. There are drugs that don't leave a trace in terms of creating a heart attack. And remember Andrew Breitbart, a friend of mine who was doing great work out in Los Angeles. He mysteriously died one night of a heart attack, just as he was. In fact, I met with him that morning. We were getting into a scandal called the Pigford scandal.
Yeah.
Pigford. Okay, that was when Obama and company, pushed legislation, and then a ultra leftist judge, Paul Friedman, of the federal court in Washington D.C., rubber stamped a settlement where any African American that could remember he made a loan, an agricultural loan, but had no documentation, would get $80,000 off the top. And then there were these crooks in the agriculture department who were profiting off this, because if you could actually come up with documents and do some bogus presentation of damage, your damage was unlimited. And Andrew was onto that, and I was helping him with that. And he mysteriously comes home from a bar that night and drops dead. Now, I had actually said to Larry Solov, who was his partner and very close friend, I said, we can investigate that. Larry didn't want me to do it. He looked afraid, for his own health, frankly, at the time. But it's always been a mystery as to why Andrew Breitbart, who was relatively young, just kind of keeled over after going to a bar at that particular moment in history.
And Lee Stranahan has spoken about this quite a bit. He was also good friends with Andrew Breitbart. I don't know how well you know Lee, but even the suggestion that anything other than, normal, natural causes, it gets Lee very upset. Lee has told me that it's known that Andrew had a congenital heart problem. I believe he was adopted, so there's not a lot known about his family health
adopted.
history. Yeah.
His stepfather was Orson Bean, the famous talk show host in Hollywood. And Andrew was Jewish, by the way. He wasn't born Jewish, but he became Jewish. And the people around him were Jewish, Larry Solov and others. But, he may have died, in terms of that. But on the other hand, he may have died otherwise. But, Putin and the others, the United States, the CIA, they all can take people out. The Mossad is much more accomplished than the CIA, and much more competent, I might add. And, when tens of thousands of Israelis are at risk and thousands have died, even though I love Israel and I'm a Zionist, I'm a proud Zionist, which means that I believe that Israel was given to the Jews and Christians by God. It wouldn't put me past. I wouldn't put it past the Mossad to send a little warning to the Chinese communist leadership.
Yeah. Just one last thing on Andrew Breitbart. I'm open to whatever the truth is. I just want some more details. I haven't tried super hard, but I've put some effort in trying to learn what this congenital heart defect was. I know some people who know some things about cardiology, and I just want to ask. No one's been able to tell me what this pre-existing congenital heart defect was.
shortly after his body was examined by coroner, the coroner mysteriously died. You might remember that. Okay, so, you know, does two and two equal a four? I don't know. But there was also a suggestion that in the earlier part of Andrew's life that he used cocaine and it weakened his heart. So, I mean, who knows? But it seemed very strange to me. I was with him that morning. He looked like he was in great health. He was happy. And I was with my associate over in his place. He kind of had a place in a bunker where no one would know where he was. And Andrew was a great man. I mean, he did a lot of really good things, and it's very sad that he died.
Yeah. And that's interesting to learn that you were with him on the day that he died. There's a lot of people, anytime you say you're a Zionist, Larry, people get very upset. And Tommy C says that's not what Zionism means. I don't want to get into a big debate about
what Tommy Z says is incorrect, and he should do a little better research and not listening to radical Muslims and Islamicists like Ilham Omar.
It's become one of these terms that's a real flashpoint. I think that people
the land of Zion, the land of Israel. Okay, it means that you believe that God bequeathed that land to the Jewish people. That's all it means. Okay, so do your homework, Mr. Z.
Right. Let's talk in our last few minutes here about Laura Loomer. She's running for Congress in Florida's 21st district, and people who are able to vote for her should. I endorse Laura for Congress. I endorse Laura for almost anything. She's one of the smartest people I know, and I hope that she wins. People can contribute to her campaign, even if they're not in Florida, by going to lauraloomerforcongress.com. What's the status of this lawsuit against Facebook, Larry?
Well, Laura is my client and also my friend, and she is a great person and very courageous. There are very few people like Laura. Again, you won't see Laura on Fox News because anybody who does anything, who sticks their neck out, is not on there. You just have people like Dan Bongino who speak well but do nothing. And I don't dislike Bongino, I might add, but that's an example, okay? Or Sarah Carter.
Devin Nunes is on there a lot.
Nunes, yeah. So I mean, you got purveyors of smoke and mirrors on Fox.
That's right.
Be that as it may, yeah, the status of that case, the case wound up in front of a Trump appointee, and I've been saying the Trump appointees are not what they're cracked up to be. He messed around for almost a year, and he transferred the case to San Francisco because it was a hot potato, and he didn't want to have to deal with it. So it's in San Francisco federal court right now, moving forward. But I have a few tricks up my sleeve in terms of that. Now, she also has a lawsuit along with Freedom Watch that is in the Court of Appeals in Washington, D.C., and I recently asked the court to have oral argument by teleconference. They declined. But what's really important about that, that's about the discrimination against conservatives by social media like Google, Facebook, Apple, the whole rest of them. And it just was announced yesterday, finally, that various states' attorney generals and my alma mater in the antitrust division of the Justice Department are going to be filing complaints against Google, at least. And, Facebook's wrapped in with all of this. So we're pursuing that. And we also have other lawsuits against the media who have trashed Laura, called her dangerous, called her all kinds of names. And, I'm frankly not going to put up with it. I have a number of clients where that's happened, Sheriff Joe Arpaio, Justice Roy Moore, others. But it cannot be open season to defame people. And we've got to change the law in this country. I think we've got to go the way of Great Britain and make, intentional defamation a criminal act as well.
Interesting. It's, Devin Nunes has been suing a lot of people for defamation, but his lawyer has been encountering some difficulties in their actual meetings with federal judges. So we'll see where that goes. There's an article on Reuters about this state attorneys likely to bring antitrust lawsuit against Google. We'll have to see where that goes. It's interesting. They didn't get too far with Microsoft, did they, Larry?
That's a slightly different issue, what they're going to bring it on. They're bringing it on Google's advertising policies, okay, how they, exclude people. But it's analogous in many other respects to what we're talking about. And I alleged on behalf of Freedom Watch and on behalf of Laura and on behalf of a class, it's a class action, that they were acting in an anti-competitive fashion, these social media. They were colluding in restraint of trade to deny conservatives a voice on social media. So
And this
we'll
is
see
an
what they
area
do.
of expertise for you, because when you were with the Department of Justice, one of the things that you did was participate in the antitrust against AT&T, broke it up into smaller phone companies, right?
That's when the Justice Department was a lot different than today. I really enjoyed working with the staff there, the team. We really believed in what we were doing. I did see politics at the Justice Department. I wrote about it in my book Whores, and that's why I left. But the AT&T trial team was a great experience, and that's what the Justice Department should be about.
Maybe we can get it back to that. We covered a lot of bases today, Larry. Anything you want to talk about before we wrap it up on this Sunday evening?
I think the general thing is that I want people to support our cases, our class action against the communist Chinese in Dallas, Texas. Go to freedomwatchusa.org, sign up, contribute. We need the tax deductible contributions. We need to get bigger. We also have a similar lawsuit that was filed in Jerusalem, Israel, and it's going to even move faster there. We have at least 4 experts who will testify that this is a bioweapon. But we have whistleblowers from inside of government agencies that will do that as well, that know the truth. It's a very powerful case. And I ask you to contact the White House to urge President Trump to instruct his Attorney General to support what we're doing there. I don't need his help, and I don't need the Justice Department's help, but it'd be nice to have it. And the president needs to do more than just call this a Chinese virus. He needs to be much more aggressive. And these Chinese dictators in Beijing, I believe, once the virus got out, saw the utility of it in destroying not just the United States, but the entire world economy, and they're profiting by it as we speak. And then we have a case at the International Criminal Court in The Hague, Holland, which they're actually taking seriously. You know, the Europeans are not often on our side, but when you gore their ox, and when they get subjected to this pandemic with lots of death, and all of a sudden they become your allies. And I'm not anti-European, I might add. I speak French and Italian. I've lived there. I've had European clients. But there's a real good chance that they'll take action here and indict Chinese officials in that. And that we need the support for that to keep supplying information to the International Criminal Court. And then we intend to bring class actions in other parts of the United States and around the world. I'm being contacted from all different countries, from all different regions. And we're the only ones really who are doing it in any major way, and that's why China attacked us by name, Freedom Watch. And that's a proud honor to be called
How
ugly
did
by a
China do
frog.
that?
Can they attack me?
How did they do that?
Verbally. They attacked me verbally. It reminds me of when Castro called me one of the 2 greatest enemies of the Cuban people. That was a real compliment.
Wow. So I guess maybe now Justin Trudeau needs to pick up that.
In Venezuela, yeah.
Yeah. Well, Larry, it's always good to see you, and I definitely encourage viewers of Crowdsource the Truth to visit freedomwatchusa.org and to contribute to the various cases that you're bringing forward. I think it's very important what you're doing. People can also listen to your radio show, Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. They can hear it on the website there. They can, where are the best places for people to reach you on social media, Larry?
freedomwatchusa.org and our YouTube channel. Yeah. Call up our YouTube channel. And one point, Jason, I commend you because you allow me to tell the truth, much like Radio America does on my show, Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. And we have a podcast every morning that people can get at freedomwatchusa.org on iTunes, Spotify, Roku, Amazon Fire, Facebook, Twitter. But it's very important. Don't swallow the Kool-Aid and get up off the couch, turn Fox News off, and join Freedom Watch and join other groups that are trying to change the nature of this country, which is in a really bad condition right now. So that's my message. Don't drink the Kool-Aid. Don't be part of the Kool-Aid club. You know, think for yourself and have a good degree of skepticism about what you're being fed on Hannity and on Fox News.
Larry, it's always my pleasure to have you on, even when the topic is something I know that people are going to have a negative response to. I like to hear your opinion on things, and I think that people who come to watch our shows, half of them come here because they love you, half of them come here because they want to put crappy comments in while you speak, but let them do it. I mean,
Well, Let him do it. I've never done this, Jason. I know we're running out of time. I've never done it to make money. I've never done it to, pander to people. I've never done it because I want to be part of the club. As Groucho Marx said, I wouldn't want to be a member of a club that would have me as a member.
That's exactly right. Well, Larry, thank you for joining me tonight, and thanks for your insights in all this stuff. I want to remind people that I can't bring you this kind of news without your sponsorship. So people who watch the show and enjoy the show want me to keep having guests like Larry Klayman. Please become a sponsor. Visit patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth or subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth. And don't forget to visit freedomwatchusa.org. Larry, thanks for joining me tonight. We'll have you back real soon, and enjoy the rest of the weekend.
Thank you, my good friend. God bless.
Thanks for watching, everybody.